Evelyn Carter slammed both palms flat against the boardroom table so hard that 12 water glasses jumped and one of them went over. "Say it," she said. "Say the word all of you have been whispering in the parking garage for 6 months." Nobody moved, nobody breathed, so she said it for them. Cripple. What none of those 12 people knew was that the man who would eventually get her out of that chair was 40 floors below them. At that exact moment, holding a cardboard box, a delivery slip, and $11 in his checking account. Before we start, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. And if you've ever been written off by people who never asked you a single honest question, subscribe and stay with me. This one's for you. The meeting had been on the calendar for 9 days under the name Q4 Strategic Alignment, and Evelyn Carter had known for 8 of those days that it had nothing to do with the fourth quarter. She knew because Richard Hayes had started being kind to her. Richard Hayes had not been kind to her in 19 years. He had been useful and sharp and occasionally correct, and exactly twice a year he had been an outright obstacle. But kind never. So when he began holding doors, when he began asking about her weekend, when he began saying, "Take your time," in that soft voice people use on the elderly and the dying, Evelyn understood that a knife was already in the air and had been for some time. She rolled into the room at 8:58 that Tuesday morning. 2 minutes early, which for her meant leaving her office 9 minutes early because the hallway carpet in the East Wing had been replaced the previous spring with something thicker and nobody had thought to ask her about it. And now every trip down that corridor cost her an extra 90 seconds and a burning ache across both shoulders. Nobody had thought to ask her about it. That was the sentence that had defined 17 years of her life. "Morning, Evelyn," Richard said, standing. 3 others stood too. That was new. They never used to stand. "Sit down, Richard." He sat. She took her position at the head of the table. They had removed the chair there years ago, and she'd never once had to ask for it, which was one of the few small mercies of the last 2 decades. And she folded her hands and waited. Richard Hayes was 61 years old. Silver at the temples, tailored within an inch of his life, and he had a way of talking that made betrayal sound like concern for your health. "I want to start," he said, "by saying how much every person at this table respects what you've built." That's an odd way to start a quarterly review. A small laugh went around the table, the laugh of people who had rehearsed. "Evelyn." He opened a folder. He didn't look at it. He never looked at his folders. "Carter Medical is 41 years old. You took it over when it was 11 employees and a warehouse in Rockford. It's now 9,000 people in 14 countries. Nobody disputes that. But the industry is entering a phase that requires—" he searched for it theatrically, a man pretending to find a word he'd polished for a month. "Sustained physical presence. Investor roadshows. Plant visits. Regulatory meetings in Brussels, in Tokyo, and Sao Paulo. The pace of the next 5 years is not the pace of the last 5. Evelyn let the silence sit there long enough to get uncomfortable. "Richard, I flew to Osaka in March." "You did. I closed a $140 million distribution agreement in Osaka in March." "You did. So say the actual sentence." "I'm sorry." "The sentence you came here to say. Not the version with the airports in it. The real one." She leaned forward. "You think I can't do the job because I can't stand up?" The room went so quiet she could hear the HVAC cycling. A woman named Priya Raghavan, 39, head of regulatory, looked directly at her plate. 2 others looked at Richard. One man, Doug Feeney, who had been on this board since before Evelyn's accident, and who had eaten Thanksgiving dinner at her house 4 times, looked out the window. That was the one that hurt. Doug looking out the window. "That's beneath you," Richard said gently. "Is it?" "Nobody in this room has said one word about your condition." "That's right." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Not one word. In 17 years, not one of you has said one word. You've said pace. You've said optics. You've said bandwidth and travel demands and the next chapter. You have built an entire vocabulary so that you would never once have to say the true thing out loud. Evelyn. So I'll say it." And that was when she brought both palms down flat on the table. The glasses jumped. One went over and rolled and dumped ice water across the polished walnut, and nobody reached for it, and the water ran to the edge and started ticking onto the carpet one drop at a time for the rest of the meeting. "Say it," she said. "Say the word all of you have been whispering in the parking garage for 6 months." Nobody moved. "Cripple." Priya Raghavan flinched like she'd been slapped. "That's the word. That's what's actually on the table this morning, not the roadshow schedule." Evelyn's voice didn't rise. It never rose. That was what people always got wrong about her. They waited for the yelling, and the yelling never came, and by the time they understood that the quiet was the anger, it was generally too late. Every one of you has spent years being extremely careful not to say it. And I want to be clear about something. That carefulness was never for me. It was for you, so you could go home and feel decent. Doug Feeney finally turned from the window. "Ev, don't. I've known you 30 years. You have, she said. And you just spent 4 minutes looking at a parking lot." He didn't answer. Richard closed the folder. "Nobody is proposing anything today. This was a conversation." "No, Richard. This was a temperature check. You wanted to see who'd hold their hand up." She looked slowly around the table and let each one of them take it. "Now you know. Congratulations. Meeting adjourned." She made it to the elevator before her hands started shaking. Her chief of staff, Marcus Bell, was already there holding the door. Marcus was 34, built like a retired linebacker, and had been with her 6 years and had a sixth sense for exactly how long she needed to be alone. 20 seconds generally. He gave her 40. "How bad?" "She, 6 of 12, she said. "You're sure?" "Priya wouldn't look at me. Doug wouldn't look at me." Kessler was smiling. When Kessler smiles, it means he's already counted the votes. She pressed her thumb hard into the center of her palm, an old trick, something to feel that she'd chosen. 6 of 12 today, which means 8 of 12 in March. Then we get to work. "Marcus." "Ma'am." "Do you think they're right?" He didn't answer fast. That was one of the reasons she'd hired him. The fast answer would have been of course not, and she would have stopped trusting him inside of a week. "I think," he said carefully, "that you have run this company for 19 years, and 13 of them were profitable, and 4 of them were record-breaking, and 2 of them were the worst years in the industry, and we survived both. I think if you had a bad hip, nobody would be holding a meeting. That's not what I asked. I know it's not." The elevator doors opened on 41. "I'm asking you," she said, "if I've gotten tired." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "I think you got tired about 4 years ago, and you've been running on discipline ever since. Discipline's not nothing, but it's not the same thing." Evelyn nodded once. "Thank you for not lying." "Anytime." There is a particular loneliness that belongs to people who are admired. Evelyn Carter had a Wikipedia page and an honorary doctorate and a wing of a children's hospital in Evanston with her name over the door. She had been on the cover of 2 magazines. In 2019, a college in Iowa had given her a commencement speech slot, and 1,100 graduates had stood up and applauded when she rolled onto the stage, and she had gone back to her hotel room afterward and sat in the dark for an hour and a half without turning on the television. Because here is the thing. Nobody says about admiration. It is a wall. People do not bring their problems to a person they admire. They do not complain about their knees. They do not say, "God, I'm exhausted." They stand up straighter, and they say something a little too polished, and then they go be human with somebody else. For 17 years, Evelyn had watched people be human with somebody else. Her office was on 41 corner floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides, a view of the river, and half of downtown Chicago. It was the office of a person who had won. She had stopped looking out the window in 2016. Not deliberately. There was no dramatic moment. She had simply noticed one Thursday that she'd developed a habit of positioning her desk chair at an angle that put the glass behind her left shoulder, and once she noticed it, she understood why. And once she understood why, she did not bother to fix it. Because what was down there? People walking. That was all. That was the whole thing. 20,000 people every morning moving up Wacker Drive without thinking about it. Kids running for the bus. A man carrying 2 coffees and a laptop bag, and his phone under his chin, doing 3 things at once with a body that just did it. A woman crouching down to tie a little girl's shoe and then standing back up, like standing back up was nothing. Standing back up was nothing. That was the sentence that could still take her apart on a bad night 17 years in. She had been 41 years old on the night of the accident. October 14th. Rain. She'd been driving herself back from a plant tour in Aurora because she'd wanted the quiet, and the last clear memory she had of the whole evening was reaching over to turn the radio down. That was it. That was the entire before and after of her life. A hand reaching for a dial. The next 11 months were surgeries and infections, and a rehab facility in Wisconsin with terrible coffee. And at the end of those 11 months, a neurosurgeon named Dr. Alan Prescott sat down across from her and said the sentence she would carry for the next 16 years. "Evelyn, I believe you've reached the maximum recovery possible." She'd asked him to say it again. He said it again. "Maximum," she'd repeated. "That's a strange word. Maximum implies you've tested the edge. We've done a great deal of testing. You've done a great deal of stabilizing. Those aren't the same." And Prescott had given her a look she would think about on and off for a decade and a half. A look of patience, so complete, it was almost tender. The look of a man who had explained this to 200 people and had watched every one of them go through the same 3 stages. "There's a phase most patients go through," he'd said, "where they need the injury to be somebody's fault or somebody's failure. It's a natural part of adjustment." And how long does that phase last? For most people, about a year. And if it lasts 17? He had smiled sadly. "Then I'd be worried about you." She had heard variations of that sentence from 11 specialists over 16 years. "You've plateaued. The window for neurological recovery is largely closed. I'd hate to see you spend your life chasing something." Have you considered speaking with someone about acceptance? Acceptance. God, how she'd grown to hate that word. It got said to her in a certain voice, always a voice with a slight downward slope at the end, and it always meant the same thing, which was, "Stop asking me questions I can't answer." She had accepted, publicly, thoroughly, and for a long time. She had gutted the master bathroom, put in the roll-in shower, sold the house in Lake Forest with the 6 front steps, bought the flat one in Winnetka. She'd hired the trainers. She'd done the pool work. She'd built the whole architecture of a life that fit inside the sentence, "This is permanent," and she had built it so well that people used her as an example. Look at Evelyn Carter. She didn't let it stop her. What nobody understood was that acceptance and belief are 2 completely different animals, and you can practice one for 17 years without ever once feeling the other. She had accepted. She had never not, for one single day, believed. At 7:40 that night, Marcus knocked twice and came in with a tablet. "You want this now or tomorrow?" "Now." Legal pulled the board's outside counsel billing. Standard governance audit, nothing unusual on the surface. He set it down. "Except Hayes has been running a separate engagement since February. Different firm. Billed under the Innovation Committee." "How much?" $400,000. Evelyn looked up. $400,000 in outside legal on a committee that meets twice a year. That's the one. "What's the engagement scope?" "Redacted in the summary. I've requested the full file. Legal says 14 days. Get it in 7. Working on it." He hesitated. "There's something else. Might be nothing." "Say it." The billing partner on Hayes's engagement, his firm also handled a malpractice defense in 2011. Not ours. Northwestern Memorial. Evelyn went very still. "Which physician?" "Doesn't say. It's a firm-level record, not a matter-level one. I only saw it because the same partner's name showed up twice in the same search." Marcus watched her face. "Ma'am, I want to be careful here. That's a big hospital and a big firm, and there are 1,000 innocent reasons." "I know. I'm not saying it's anything." "I know, Marcus. But you've got that look." "I've got what look?" "The 2013 look. The one you had before you fired the entire Milwaukee supply chain." Evelyn almost smiled. "Get me the full file in 7 days." "Yes, ma'am." He got to the door and she said his name. "Marcus." "Yeah." If it turns out I'm the woman who spent 17 years needing this to be somebody's fault, she said, I want you to tell me, straight, not gently. Marcus Bell stood in the doorway with his hand on the frame. You've never once asked me to be gentle, he said. I don't know why you'd start tonight. She stayed until 10:15. She always stayed late, and everybody assumed it was ambition, and it had been ambition for the first 9 or 10 years. Now it was something plainer. At the office, she was Evelyn Carter. At home, she was a 58-year-old woman alone in a very quiet house, doing a transfer from a chair to a bed, which took 90 seconds if it went well, and could take 20 minutes if her arms had had a hard week. Her arms had had a hard week. She got herself down to the garage at 10:20 and sat in her car for a while before starting it, which was another thing she'd started doing in the last few years and had never told a living soul. Then she drove home and did the 90 seconds. It took 4 minutes. She lay in the dark and did what she'd done maybe 8,000 times, which was to send a signal down her right leg. Move. Nothing. Move. Nothing. There is no way to describe to a person with a working body what it is to give an order to your own leg and have the order simply vanish. Not refused. Not resisted. Vanished. Like shouting into a room and finding out there's no room. She'd read once that the medical term for what she had was incomplete injury. Incomplete. Doctors loved that word because it was technically accurate and it cost them nothing. Incomplete meant some pathway somewhere was theoretically intact. Incomplete meant maybe. 16 years of maybe. Move, she thought. Nothing. She turned her face into the pillow, and at 58 years old, a woman with 9,000 employees and a hospital wing named after her, cried for about 4 minutes quietly, the way you cry when you have had a great deal of practice. Then she stopped and wiped her face with the heel of her hand and said out loud to an empty room, Fine. 26 miles southwest in a 2-bedroom rental in Berwyn, with a radiator that banged like a man with a hammer, Nathan Miller was awake at 1:00 a.m., doing math. The math went like this. Rent $1,340. Due Friday. Checking 11. Paycheck Thursday, 8/12 after tax. Lily's winter coat, the purple one from the consignment place marked down twice 24. Electric 96 past due second notice. Car needed a serpentine belt 3 weeks ago and had started making a sound he'd been pretending not to hear. He ran it 4 different ways at the kitchen table, and all 4 ways came out the same, which was that Friday worked and next Friday didn't. Down the hall, his daughter turned over in her sleep, and the bed springs creaked. Nathan Miller was 43. 8 years ago, he'd had a corner desk and a badge that said, Senior Biomedical Engineer Class 3, Devices, and he'd held 6 patents, 4 of them still in clinical use in hospitals in 11 states, and none of them paying him a dime, because he'd signed them over to a company that had been acquired and dissolved and folded into something in Delaware that no longer answered its phones. He'd had 81 interviews in the first 2 years. He'd counted. Overqualified. We're looking for someone earlier in their career. There's a gap on your resume. The gap. He loved that one. The gap was the 11 months he'd spent full-time being the only parent of a girl whose mother had gotten in a Nissan and driven to Arizona, and he'd tried exactly once to explain that in an interview, and he'd watched the man's face do a thing, a small polite closing, and he never explained it again. So now, Nathan drove a route for a medical equipment distributor. $6.40 an hour above minimum, no benefits worth the name. And the one thing that made it worth more than any offer he'd turned down, he was home by 4:15, every single day. When Lily got off the bus, her father's car was in the driveway. That was the whole deal he'd made. He'd traded a career for a driveway. He didn't regret it. Some nights it just cost more than other nights. At 1:20, he closed the laptop, and then because he was who he was, and 8 years hadn't changed it, he opened it again and pulled up a paper he'd been reading in pieces for a month. Activity-dependent plasticity in chronic incomplete spinal cord injury. Locomotor training. Epidural stimulation. A Louisville study with 4 subjects, 3 of whom had regained voluntary movement below the level of injury, years after being told it was impossible. He read for 40 minutes and made 2 notes in a spiral notebook that had 11 years of notes in it. Then he went to bed because he had a 6:00 a.m. pickup. The delivery on Thursday morning was a custom thoracolumbo-sacral orthosis carbon fiber molded $6,000 retail going to a corporate address downtown. Nathan almost didn't take the run. Downtown meant the loading dock lottery, and 40 minutes of his life he'd never see again. But the dispatcher said the client was a priority account, and the signature had to be executive level. So at 9:50 a.m., he was standing in a 41st floor reception area in a delivery jacket with a box under his arm, feeling every inch of the distance between the man he'd been and the man holding the clipboard. "You can leave it at the desk," the assistant said. "They want an executive signature." She sighed and picked up the phone. 2 minutes later, a woman in a chair came out of the corner office. Nathan had delivered to maybe 400 people in wheelchairs over 3 years. He'd learned early that most of them had developed an armor for exactly this moment. The moment a stranger with a medical box walks in, and the armor was usually either brightness or ice. This one was ice. "Where do I sign?" Evelyn Carter said. "Right here, ma'am." She signed. He tore the slip. And then he didn't leave because he'd set the box down and the flap had come open and he was looking at the brace inside it. He looked at it for 4 seconds. 5. "Is there a problem?" "No, ma'am." "Then why are you still standing in my office?" Nathan Miller thought about $11 in his checking account and a serpentine belt and 81 interviews, and the very simple fact that people who deliver boxes do not offer opinions to people who run buildings. "How long have you worn a rigid brace?" he said. Evelyn's head came up. "Excuse me. That's a full-contact TLSO. Rigid, not dynamic. It's a good one. It's the best one, actually. That's a Kessner shell. They only make about 900 a year." He was talking faster now, the way he had not talked in 8 years. "Is that a replacement for one you already have?" "My 4th in 12 years. She was staring at him. "Why?" "How many hours a day do you wear it?" 14. 16. "Since when?" "Since 2011. Nathan was quiet. "Say whatever you're about to say," Evelyn said. "It's not my place." "I've had 11 specialists tell me it's not my place to ask questions about my own spine. You're a grown man in my office at 10 in the morning. Say it." And Nathan Miller, who had lost a company, a marriage, a career, and every ounce of professional standing he'd ever earned, and who had somehow never lost the one thing that made him good at this, looked at the $60,000 chair, and the $90,000 view, and the $6,000 brace, and asked the question that nobody in 17 years had thought to ask. "Ma'am," he said, "in all this time, has anybody ever tested what your body can do without it?" Evelyn Carter did not answer for 11 seconds. Nathan counted them. He had a habit of counting things when he was about to lose something, and by second 7, he understood that he had probably just talked himself out of a job over a woman he'd never met and would never see again. "Get out of my office," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "I mean now." "Yes, ma'am." He picked up the empty dolly and turned, and he got 4 steps toward the elevator before her voice hit him in the back. "Do you know what I've spent on doctors?" He stopped. "Say a number," she said. "Go ahead. You're clearly comfortable with opinions this morning. Take a guess." "I don't know, ma'am." "Guess." "A lot." $3.1 million. Her voice was perfectly level, which was somehow worse than shouting. "Not counting the equipment, not counting the house I had to rebuild." $3.1 million in physicians, and 11 of them were department heads, and 2 of them wrote the textbook. The actual textbook, the one they teach from, and every single one of them told me the same thing. "And you walked in here with a clipboard." "Yes, ma'am." "So explain to me the arithmetic where you know something they don't." Nathan turned around. "I didn't say I knew anything," he said. "I asked you a question." "Same thing." "No, ma'am, it isn't. Not even a little bit." The assistant at the desk had gone completely still, the way people do when they're trying to become furniture. "You've got about 6 seconds before I call security," Evelyn said. "Then I'll use them." He set the dolly down. You've worn a rigid full-contact shell 14 to 16 hours a day since 2011. That's 5,200 days. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not going to pretend to be one. But that brace isn't treatment, it's architecture. It holds a load so your body doesn't have to. And every device I ever designed that held a load for somebody, we had to write a protocol for how to take it away again, because if you don't, the thing underneath it stops showing up for work. Stops showing up for work. That's not the clinical language. No kidding. The clinical language is disuse, muscular, and also... He stopped himself. Also what? That's the part I'm not qualified to say out loud. Evelyn's hands were flat on the arms of her chair. Security, she said to the assistant. At 10:14 that morning, Nathan Miller was walked to a service elevator by a man in a blazer who apologized twice on the way down. He sat in the van in the loading dock for a full minute before he started it. Then he drove the rest of his route a nursing facility in Cicero, 2 hospital supply rooms, a private residence in Oak Park, where an old man named Sal always tried to give him a Coke, and he did not think about the woman on the 41st floor at all, except approximately every 4 minutes. At 3:50 that afternoon, his dispatcher called. Miller? Yeah. You want to tell me what happened at Carter Medical? Nathan pulled over. I delivered a TLSO. Uh-huh. And I said something I shouldn't have said. Yeah, see, that tracks because I've got a complaint from a corporate account that bills us 300 grand a year, and the complaint says a driver gave unsolicited medical opinions to the chief executive officer. A long breath on the other end. Nate, buddy, what in the hell? How bad is it? It's a write-up. It's in your file. And if that account calls back one more time, it's not a write-up. The dispatcher's voice softened a click. Look, everybody knows you were something before. Half the warehouse knows. But you can't do that. You're the guy with the box. I know. Do you? Yeah. Okay, go home. At 4:11. Nathan pulled into his driveway. At 4:15, a bus stopped at the corner, and a 9-year-old girl came down the sidewalk with her backpack on one shoulder, and Nathan Miller was standing in the doorway, like he had been standing in the doorway every weekday for 3 years. Dad. Hey, kid? Can I have the tablet? Homework. After. Before. Dad. Before Lily. She dropped the backpack in the exact spot she always dropped it, which was the spot most likely to break somebody's ankle, and Nathan moved it with his foot without either of them acknowledging that it had happened, because they had done this 1,100 times. Bad day, she said. Why? Your face is doing the thing. My face isn't doing anything. It's doing the money thing. Nathan stopped. 9 years old. It's not the money thing, he said. It's the mouth thing. Daddy said something at work he shouldn't have said. Lily considered that with tremendous seriousness. Was it a swear? No. Then it's probably fine. 22 miles northeast at 4:40 that afternoon. Evelyn Carter was staring at a screen she had not turned a page on in 50 minutes. She picked up the phone. Marcus. Ma'am. The delivery this morning. I heard. I already handled it. The vendor's putting a note in the guy's file, and we've asked for a different driver on the account. Undo it. There was a pause of exactly the right length. Say again. Undo it. Call them back. Tell them the complaint was in error, and I want it removed from his record in writing today, and I want a copy. Ma'am, he from what reception says he was pretty far out of line. He was completely out of line. So, Marcus, do you know what he actually said to me? Something about your brace. He asked me whether anyone had ever tested what my body can do without it. She heard herself say it out loud for the first time, and something in her chest did a slow, unwelcome turn. In 17 years, 11 specialists, $3.1 million. Nobody has ever asked me that question. Nobody has ever asked me what I can do. They've only ever measured what I can't. Silence on the line. That's a hell of a thing, Marcus said. Find him. The driver. Find out who he is. That'll take a day. It took him 4 hours. At 8:50 that night, Marcus Bell walked into her office without knocking, which he had done maybe 6 times in 6 years, and set a single sheet of paper down in front of her. "So this got interesting," he said. "Talk. Nathan Miller, 43, Berwyn. Route driver for Midland Medical Logistics, 3 years no incidents before today." He tapped the page. "Prior to that, 10 years at Halcyon Biomedical." "Never heard of them." "You wouldn't have. They were absorbed in 2018. Before that, they were a Class 3 device shop out of Naperville. 91 employees." Marcus tapped lower. "Senior engineer. 6 patents. 4 are still in active clinical use." Evelyn looked up. "4 of what?" "2 are cervical stabilization systems. One's a load transfer sleeve for a pediatric orthosis." Marcus paused. "And one is a dynamic response spinal brace with a graduated withdrawal protocol." Evelyn did not move. "A what?" "That's the language in the filing. I looked up what it means because I didn't know either. It's a brace that's designed to be taken away from you on a schedule." He met her eyes. "Ma'am, the man who asked you that question this morning holds a patent on the exact idea inside the question." She sat with that for a long moment. "Why is he driving a van?" "Because Halcyon got bought and gutted, and the patents went with the company, and he was out in the same quarter his wife left." Marcus shrugged, and it wasn't a careless shrug. "I found 81 job applications in 3 years on a public professional profile he hasn't updated since 2021. He stopped applying in March of that year." "Why?" "I don't know, but he's got a 9-year-old and his route is done at 4. Evelyn turned her chair toward the window for the first time in 6 years, and then, catching herself doing it, turned it back. "Get me the address of that warehouse," she said. "You want me to call him in?" "No." "Ma'am." "If I summon him, he'll come as a delivery driver. He'll stand there with his hands folded and say, 'Yes, ma'am,' to everything, and I will learn nothing." She was already reaching for her bag. "Not tonight. Tomorrow, 6 a.m. Their dock opens at 5:30, then 5:30. At 5:40 the next morning, a black car pulled into a gravel lot in Bedford Park, between 2 semis, and the men loading pallets stopped loading pallets. Nathan came out of the bay at 5:52 with a stack of route sheets in his hand, and saw the car, and knew in the way a man knows before he saw anybody in it. "Mr. Miller." He walked over slowly. "Ma'am, you're not fired," Evelyn said. "I had it pulled. There's a letter going to your supervisor this morning saying the complaint was in error." Nathan's jaw worked once. "Thank you." "That's not an apology. What you did was wildly inappropriate." "Yes, ma'am." "So we're clear?" "Crystal." "Now." She looked up at him. "Halcyon Biomedical. Patent number 9441208. Nathan went absolutely white. "How did you—" "I run a 9,000-person medical device company, Mr. Miller. Finding a patent is not the hard part of my morning." She let it land. "Dynamic response spinal orthosis with graduated withdrawal protocol. You filed it in 2014. You're the second name on it. I'm the first name on it. The filing says Whitfield. Whitfield was my director. He didn't write a line of it." Nathan said it flatly without the way a man says a thing he has finished being angry about. "That's how it works. Or that's how it worked at Halcyon." "Did it get built?" "It got built. It got through bench. It never got through funding." "Why not?" And Nathan Miller laughed one short ugly note, and then he apologized for it. "Sorry." "No. Answer the question." "Because you can't bill it." He shifted the route sheets to his other hand. "A rigid brace is a product. You sell it, you fit it, you replace it every 3 years, and if the patient wears it forever, that's a customer for life. A withdrawal protocol is a service. You sell it once it takes 18 months of clinical supervision, and if it works, the patient stops buying braces." He shrugged. "You asked. That's the answer. I'm not saying anybody's evil. I'm saying nobody funds the thing that ends the revenue." Evelyn Carter sat in the gravel lot at 6 in the morning and felt something cold walk up the back of her neck. "Say that again," she said. "Which part?" Nobody funds the thing that ends the revenue. Ma'am, I've had 8 years to be bitter about this, and I'd rather not do it in a parking lot before my first pickup. Mr. Miller. Yes, ma'am. I've been buying that brace since 2011. I know. From a company I do not own but do compete with. I know that too, and my physician prescribed it. Nathan didn't say anything. Say the thing you're not saying. I'm not going to. Why? Because I'm a guy in a delivery jacket, and you're going to go make phone calls no matter what I say, and if I say the wrong sentence out loud right now, and I'm wrong, I've done something I can't take back to somebody who's already had 17 bad years. He shook his head. Ask your own doctor. Ask him the question I asked you. Then watch his face. That's all I've got. He started to go. 6:05, she said. You've got a pickup. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Miller. He turned. Why did you stop applying for jobs in March of 2021? Nathan stood there in the gravel with the sun not up yet, and his breath showing. Because my daughter asked me why I got sad on Thursdays, he said. Thursdays were when the rejections came. Automated mostly. Same time of day. He adjusted his grip on the route sheets. You can be a failure in front of your kid. That's survivable. But you can't be a schedule. Then he walked back into the bay. At 9:20 that morning, Evelyn Carter called Dr. Alan Prescott's office and was told he was retired. At 9:35, she called Northwestern and asked for her complete file, all of it, including the internal consult notes, and was informed that a full records release for a 17-year history would take 10 to 14 business days. At 9:37, she said, "My name is Evelyn Carter." At 2:15 that afternoon, a courier delivered 940 pages. She cleared the conference room next to her office and told Marcus to cancel everything through Friday. And Marcus said, everything. And she said, everything. And he canceled everything. They read for 2 days. It was Marcus who found it at 11:40 on a Thursday night on page 611 in a consult note dated March 9, 2011. Ma'am. What? Come look at this. She came and looked at it. The note was 3 sentences long. It was signed by a physiatrist. She had never met a woman named R. Okonjo who had apparently seen her exactly once for a follow-up assessment, 14 months post-injury. PT demonstrates trace voluntary activity, R quadriceps on repeat testing, not present at 6 Mo. Recommend eval for activity-based restorative protocol. Would defer aggressive static bracing pending same. Discussed with attending. Evelyn read it 4 times. Trace voluntary activity, she said. That's what it says. In my right quadriceps. Yes, ma'am. In 2011. Yes, ma'am. Marcus in 2011, I was told. She stopped. She started again, and her voice did something it did not do. In 2011, I was told the neurological window was closed. Those words, closed. I know. Who's the attending? Marcus turned the page. The signature at the bottom was Alan Prescott's. Okay, Evelyn said. Ma'am. Okay. You want to stop for tonight? No. You've been up since... Marcus, do you understand what this is? She held the page up and her hand was steady, which frightened him more than if it had shaken. A doctor I met once in 14 years wrote down that my leg moved, and she recommended against the bracing, and she wrote that she discussed it with the attending, and 2 months later I was fitted for the first shell. She set the page down very carefully. Find Okonjo, at Nuneaton. The next morning, Marcus told her that Dr. Rachel Okonjo had left Northwestern in August of 2011 and now ran a rehabilitation program in Louisville. Evelyn said Louisville. Yes, ma'am. Say that again. Louisville, Kentucky. She thought about a paper she had never read in a spiral notebook she had never seen on a kitchen table 26 miles away. Get her on the phone. She's in clinic until 4. Then get her at 4. At 4:02. Dr. Rachel Okonjo's voice came through the speaker in a corner office on the 41st floor and said, I'm sorry, Evelyn Carter. The Evelyn Carter. Yes. I saw you once. 14 months out. I remember the case. You remember it. I remember all 4 of them. A pause. That's not a nice sentence. I'm sorry. All 4 of what? Ms. Carter, I left that hospital in 2011. I'm not going to be able to be as useful to you as you want me to be, and I need to be careful here. Doctor, I'm not recording. There's no attorney on this line. Nobody is coming after you. Evelyn leaned toward the phone. I'm 58 years old. I've spent 17 years believing something. I read a note you wrote 15 years ago, 3 days ago, and I have not slept since. Please. The silence went on so long that Marcus started to think the line had dropped. You had trace quad activity, Okonjo said. Right leg, not much. It wasn't there at 6 months, and it was there at 14, which is the direction you want and the timeline you don't expect. I flagged it. I recommended a restorative eval, and I recommended against locking you into aggressive static bracing, because at that time, there was early work suggesting that immobilization in incomplete injuries could suppress exactly the signal I was seeing. And what happened? I was a second-year attending. I wrote a note. And I was told the patient was high profile, that the recovery expectations had already been set with the family and the company, and that we weren't going to introduce a speculative protocol into a case with that much visibility. Evelyn closed her eyes. Who told you that? Ms. Carter. Who? I'm not going to name a colleague on a phone call, but I'll tell you it was the attending, and I'll tell you that his note that afternoon says the finding was not reproducible. A breath. It was reproducible. I reproduced it twice. I was there. Why didn't you fight it? I did fight it, for about 3 weeks. Okonjo's voice cracked slightly for the first time. And then I got told I had a promising career, and then I left, and I've thought about you maybe 200 times since, and I want you to hear something clearly, because I'm not going to get another chance to say it. I was 29, and I was scared, and I chose myself. I'm sorry. Genuinely. Evelyn Carter sat with her fingers pressed against her mouth. Doctor. Yes. Is it too late? For what? 15 years later, is it too late? I don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one, Ms. Carter. Nobody knows. But I'll tell you what I do know, which is that the literature in 2011 was thin, and the literature now is not. And I know 4 people personally who regained voluntary movement more than a decade out. Okonjo paused. It's brutal. It's 18 months minimum. Most people quit at month 5, and I mean most, and I mean people who are tougher than they think they are. I want an evaluation. I'd want you evaluated by somebody with no relationship to that hospital or that manufacturer. Then you. I have a 9-month wait list. Doctor. Ms. Carter, I don't take patients because they can pay. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? I'm asking, Evelyn said, because 15 years ago, you were the only person in the building who wrote down that my leg moved. The line was quiet. Send me the imaging, Okonjo said. All of it. Every study since 2009. At 6 p.m. Marcus closed the door and stood in front of her desk and said, Ma'am, we need to talk about the other thing. What other thing? Hayes's engagement file came in. I got it in 6 days. He put the folder down. The scope is still mostly redacted. But somebody at the firm was sloppy, and the matter description carried over into the billing header on 4 invoices. Read it. Governance Contingency Planning. CEO Medical Status and Succession Triggers. He looked up. Ma'am, they've been building a file on your body since February. Evelyn Carter did not react at all, which was how Marcus knew. February, she said. February 4th. What happened on February 4th? I checked. You had a scheduled physical. He said the next part carefully. It's in your calendar, and there is exactly 1 line in your calendar that week that I can't source, and it's a 40-minute block on February 5th, labeled with a set of initials. Whose? AP. Evelyn's hand went flat on the desk. Alan Prescott has been retired for 2 years, she said. Yes, ma'am. And he was in this building on February 5th. Somebody with his initials was on your executive floor calendar for 40 minutes. The block was created by Richard Hayes's assistant. At 7:15 that night, Evelyn Carter called down to the garage, and 40 minutes later, a black car pulled up in front of a two-bedroom rental in Berwyn, with a radiator that banged like a man with a hammer, and Nathan Miller opened the door in a t-shirt with a dish towel over his shoulder. He looked at her for a second and a half. "Ma'am, Mr. Miller. Is this about the, 'May I come in?'" Nathan glanced back into the house, and Evelyn saw him do the calculation that every person in a small house does, and she said, "There's a step. There's two. Then talk to me here. No, hang on." He disappeared and came back with a sheet of 3/4 plywood that had clearly been leaning behind the house for a decade, and he laid it over the steps, and he did it fast, and without ceremony, and without once saying anything about how he was happy to help. Inside, a 9-year-old girl in mismatched socks looked up from a math worksheet and said, "Hi." "Hello. You're in a wheelchair." "Lily." "It's fine," Evelyn said. "Yes, I am." "Does it go fast?" "Lily, go finish that in your room." "It goes very fast," Evelyn said, "and no, you cannot ride on it." Lily grinned and took her worksheet and went, and Nathan stood in his own kitchen with a dish towel over his shoulder, looking like a man in an interrogation room. "Mr. Miller, I want to offer you a job." "No. You haven't heard it." "Doesn't matter. It's director level. It's a restorative devices group that does not currently exist and that I intend to fund at $11 million over 3 years, and you would report to me." Nathan put the dish towel on the counter. "No," he said. "Give me a reason that isn't pride." "It's not pride." "Then what is it?" "It's that 3 weeks ago you'd never heard of me, and then you found out I'm sad and broke, and I've got a kid, and now there's $11 million on my kitchen counter." He shook his head. "Ma'am, I have been 81 kinds of desperate. I have taken a job I'm too old for, and I have driven a van past the building I used to have a badge for. But if I take a job because somebody felt something when they looked at me, then 8 years of this meant nothing, and I go into that building already knowing I didn't earn the door. You think this is charity. I think you're grateful, and grief and rage all at once, and you're trying to make one of them into a higher." Evelyn Carter looked at him for a long moment. "That's very close to true," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "It's not all the way true." "No. No." She reached into the bag on the side of her chair and put a single photocopied page on his kitchen counter face up. "Read the second sentence." Nathan read it. He read it again. He sat down slowly on a kitchen chair that was not built for a man of his size, and he did not say anything for a while. "March 2011, he said. "Yes." "Trace quad, right leg." "Yes." "And they braced you in May." "Yes." Nathan put the paper down and pressed both hands over his mouth. "Ma'am." "Say it." "That's not a mistake," he said. "That's a decision." Nathan Miller sat with that sentence hanging in his own kitchen and wished he could take it back. "I shouldn't have said that." "Why not?" "Because I've been wrong about people before, and because you're going to remember I said it, and in 6 weeks when the real explanation turns out to be some boring hospital nonsense, you're going to feel stupid for having believed a guy in a delivery jacket." He pushed the page an inch away from himself. "There's 10,000 reasons a note gets ignored. Charts get lost. Attendings disagree. Second years get overruled every day of the week, and most of the time the attending's right." "Was he right?" "I don't know." "Mr. Miller." "I don't know, ma'am. I'm an engineer. I'm a laid-off engineer. Everything I've got is on paper." "Then look at the paper." He looked at it again. He looked at it for a long time, and Evelyn watched his face while he did it, and she had seen a great many faces, read a great many documents in 19 years, and she knew the difference between a man performing and a man calculating. "May," he said finally. "What? They fit you in May. Okonjo wrote her note March 9th. That's 8 weeks." He tapped the counter twice. "Ma'am, a custom TLSO takes 6 to 8 weeks from cast to delivery." So somebody started your brace before March 9th. He looked up. Whoever ordered that shell had already made the decision when she wrote the note. She wasn't overruled. She was late. At 9:40 the next morning, Evelyn Carter sat across from a woman named Diane Vasquez, who had been her outside counsel for 11 years, and who had a specific expression she made when a client was about to do something expensive. She was making it. "Say it, Diane. You want me to investigate a physician who treated you 15 years ago, a retired one on a records theory, in the middle of an active succession fight." Vasquez set down her pen. "Evelyn, if this leaks, and it will leak, Richard Hayes doesn't have to say a word about your legs anymore. He gets to say you're chasing ghosts. Then he says it. That's not a strategy, that's a mood." "Diane, I'm not saying no. I'm saying you need to hear what it sounds like from the outside." Vasquez leaned forward. 58-year-old CEO under board pressure suddenly announces her paralysis may have been mishandled. What does that sound like? It sounds like a woman who can't accept it. Yes. Which is exactly what I've been told for 17 years by every person who ever wanted me to stop asking. "I know. So it's a very good trap," Evelyn said. "It's an elegant one. It works whether or not it's true." Vasquez was quiet. "Two things," she said. "One, you don't announce anything to anyone until I have documents I can put in front of a judge. Two, you get evaluated by somebody with no connection to Northwestern, no connection to the manufacturer, and no connection to you." "Already handled." "By who?" "The second year." At 11:15, Marcus put his head in the door. "Hayes has requested a special session." Evelyn didn't look up. "When?" "He's asking for March 3rd. Now she looked up. "That's 5 weeks." "Yes, ma'am." "The annual is in June." "Yes, ma'am." "He's not waiting for June." "No, ma'am, he is not." She set her pen down very carefully, which Marcus had learned to recognize as the most dangerous thing she did with her hands. "He knows I pulled records," she said. "That's a leap. Is it I called Northwestern using my own name? I canceled 2 days of meetings. I sent a black car to Berwyn." She almost laughed. "Marcus, I've spent 17 years being watched by people pretending not to watch me. He knows I'm moving. He doesn't know where. So he's shortening the clock." "What do you want to do?" "I want to go to Kentucky." At 6:50 the following Tuesday morning, in a rehabilitation center outside Louisville that smelled like rubber matting and industrial coffee, Dr. Rachel Okonjo shook Evelyn Carter's hand and said, "Before we start, I need to say 3 things, and you're not going to like any of them. Go. 1. I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. If there's nothing here, I will tell you there's nothing here, and I'll tell you in this room today, not in a letter next week. Fine. 2. If there is something here, it is not a miracle. It's a job. It's the worst job you will ever have, and it will last 2 years, and it will hurt in ways that have nothing to do with pain. Fine. 3. Okonjo pulled a stool over and sat, which put her below eye level, and Evelyn noticed it and understood that the woman had done that on purpose, and had probably done it 10,000 times. You are the most powerful person who has ever been in this building. In here, that's a liability. Everybody who works for you has spent years telling you what you want. My staff will not. If that's going to be a problem, we should find out now. Doctor, I flew here to be told the truth by a stranger. I'd say that answers it." "Good." Okonjo stood. "Take the brace off." "I already have." Okonjo stopped. "Say again." "I stopped wearing it 19 days ago." 19 days. The day after a delivery driver asked me a question. Okonjo put both hands on her hips and looked at the ceiling and said something under her breath that was not entirely professional. "Ma'am, Ms. Carter, you don't do that. You don't come off a rigid shell you've worn 16 hours a day for 15 years without supervision. That's how people end up with pain syndromes. That's how people end up with, I know. You don't know. I know that in 19 days my back has hurt worse than it has since 2012, Evelyn said. I know I've slept 4 hours a night. I know that on day 11 I nearly put it back on, and I sat on the edge of the bed with it in my lap for 40 minutes. She held Okonjo's eyes. And I know that on day 14, something in my right thigh moved while I was watching television, and I have not told one living person that until this second. The room got very quiet. Describe it, Okonjo said. A twitch. A spasm or a twitch. There's a difference. There is an enormous difference, and you're going to learn it today. Okonjo was already moving toward the door. Was it rhythmic? Did it repeat? Did it happen when you moved something else? It happened when I was thinking about it. Okonjo turned back around. Say that again. I was watching a program about nothing, and I wasn't paying attention, and I thought the way you do, the way I've done 8,000 times, I thought move. And it did. Okonjo stood in the doorway with her hand on the frame. Ms. Carter, spasticity doesn't care what you're thinking about, she said. Get on the table. At 9:20 they put 14 surface electrodes on her right leg. At 9:40 a technician named Reggie explained that the machine measured electrical activity in muscle, and that the numbers meant nothing on their own, and that she should please not stare at the screen. Evelyn stared at the screen. At 9:51. Okonjo said, relax completely. Don't try. I want a baseline of you doing nothing. At 9:54, Okonjo said, now, right leg, extend the knee. Nothing happened. Again. Nothing. Again. Nothing and nothing and nothing. And on the 11th attempt, Evelyn Carter heard her own voice say, this is humiliating. And heard Okonjo say, without any softness at all, yes, again. At 10:06 on the 23rd attempt, the line on the screen moved. It was not much. It was a small, ugly stutter in a flat green line, and it lasted less than a second, and Reggie the technician said, huh, in a completely neutral voice, and Evelyn Carter's entire body went cold. Was that me? Nobody answered. Doctor, was that me or was that the machine? Do it again, Okonjo said. Was that? Do it again. Evelyn did it again. The line moved again. At 10:40 they had done it 41 times, and it had come back 29 of them, and Okonjo told Reggie to run the whole protocol a second time with the electrodes repositioned by a different tech, because she wanted to be able to say in a deposition that she had tried to make it go away. It did not go away. At 11:50, Rachel Okonjo sat down on the stool again and said, okay. Okay what? You have volitional motor activity in your right quadriceps and less consistently in the right hip flexor. It is weak. It is unreliable. You cannot do anything with it. It will not lift your leg off this table today or in 6 months. But it's real. It's real. Evelyn Carter put her hand over her eyes. She stayed like that for about 20 seconds, and Okonjo did not say anything. And later Evelyn would think that the not saying anything was the kindest thing anybody had done for her in 15 years. Doctor. Yes. Is it more than 2011? Okonjo hesitated, and it was the first time all morning she had. Yes, she said. How much more? That's the wrong question. Then what's the right one? The right one is why. Okonjo pulled a laptop over. Ms. Carter, I've been going through the imaging your people sent. 940 pages, and I want to be clear that I read all of it because I have not slept well since we spoke. She turned the screen. You had motor testing in 2009, 2010, twice in 2011, then a gap, then again in 2013. And after 2013 nothing, not one motor assessment in 12 years. I had physicals every year. You had physicals. You had blood work and imaging and a cardiac workup that any executive would get. You have not had a formal motor exam since October of 2013. Okonjo scrolled. There's a note at the end of the 2013 study. It's one line. It says, and I'm reading it exactly further, serial motor testing not clinically indicated given established plateau. Discontinue. Who wrote it? Prescott. Of course. Ms. Carter. I want to be careful because a physician is allowed to make that call, and plenty of good physicians would have. Okonjo closed the laptop halfway. But here is what discontinuing serial motor testing does. It means that if anything ever changes, nobody will ever find out. At 2:15 that afternoon, Evelyn called Marcus from the parking lot of a rehabilitation center in Kentucky. Ma'am, 29 out of 41. There was a pause on the line, and then the sound of a very large man sitting down. "Ma'am, don't." "I'm not doing anything." "You're about to say something warm, and I will not survive it in a parking lot." "Yes, ma'am." He cleared his throat. "Vasquez has something." "Say it." Alan Prescott filed a physician financial disclosure with Northwestern every year until he retired. It's a public-facing document because of the med school appointment. Marcus's voice went flat and careful. In 2011, he added a line. Paid consultancy. Clinical Advisory Board. Who? Kessner Orthopedic Systems. Evelyn Carter sat in a car in Kentucky and did not say anything for 11 seconds. The brace. The brace. I was on their advisory board while he was prescribing me their product. Starting in 2011, and ma'am, this part is legal technically. Disclosed consultancies are extremely common. Vasquez wanted me to say that out loud before I said the next thing. Say the next thing. Kessner is private. There's no public cap table. But there's a Delaware entity that shows up on 2 of their financing filings as a minority holder, and the entity is called Halstead Grove Partners. I've never heard of it. No, ma'am, you wouldn't have. It's 4 people. And one of them files a state disclosure in Illinois every year because he sits on a nonprofit hospital board and the disclosure lists him by name. Marcus. Richard Hayes. At 6:50 that evening on a plane at 11,000 feet, Evelyn Carter said the word out loud to an empty cabin. Hayes. Then she said no, because it was too clean. And 19 years of running a company had taught her that the clean version was almost always a story you told yourself because it was easier than the true one. Hayes had joined the board in 2015, 4 years after the brace. She wrote that on a napkin, 2015, and stared at it for the rest of the flight, and by the time the wheels came down at O'Hare, she had understood that there was a hole in the middle of the story, exactly the shape of a person she had not yet identified. At 8:40 the next morning, she called Doug Feeney. Evie. He sounded like a man who had been waiting for the phone to ring for 3 weeks. Listen about the meeting. Doug, I need something. Anything. That's a big word. Ev, come on. I need the 2011 minutes, full board executive session, and the compensation committee. All of it. A pause. Why? Because I'm asking. Ev, 2011 was a bad year. We had the recall, we had the Ohio thing, we had 11 months where you weren't in the building. His voice had a strange tightness in it. There's nothing in those minutes but people panicking. Then it'll be a boring read. Why do you want them? Doug. I'm asking as your friend. You looked out a window, Evelyn said, while a man called me replaceable, so I'd think hard about which word you want to use. The silence went on for 8 full seconds. I'll get you the minutes, Doug Feeney said, and hung up. At 11:05 that morning, Nathan Miller was in the break room of a warehouse in Bedford Park with a microwave burrito when his phone rang from a number he didn't know. Miller. Mr. Miller, this is Diane Vasquez. Vasquez, I'm outside counsel to Evelyn Carter. Nathan put the burrito down. Am I in trouble? No. I'd like to ask you a technical question, and I'd like you to answer it as an engineer and not as a person who wants to be helpful. Okay? If a rigid orthosis suppressed a recovering motor signal in an incomplete injury, would that be visible? Would there be a way to distinguish it from natural plateau? On imaging, no. On anything. On serial motor testing. If you tested somebody every 6 months and the numbers went one direction while they were braced and then went the other direction when they came out of it, that'd be a pattern. Nathan rubbed his forehead. But you'd have to keep testing. If you stop testing, there's no line. There's just a dot in 2013 and then 15 years of white space. Vasquez was quiet on the other end. Mr. Miller, she said. How did you know to ask that? I didn't. It's just how you'd falsify it. Would you be willing to say that in a deposition? Nathan looked around the break room at a vending machine and a bulletin board and a laminated sign about lifting with your knees. Ma'am, I drive a van. That was not the question. At 4:30 that afternoon, Evelyn Carter called Nathan and he answered on the first ring. Ma'am. Your lawyer question. She called you. Everyone calls me Mr. Miller, it's the entire job. Something in her voice loosened half a degree. You told her you drive a van. I do drive a van. You hold 6 patents. I held 6 patents. There's a difference, and it's about $90 million. Evelyn laughed. It surprised her more than it surprised him. I'm going to ask you again, she said. Ma'am. Not the job. Something else. She took a breath. 29 out of 41. Silence. Say that again, Nathan said. 29 attempts out of 41 produced volitional EMG activity in my right quadriceps. Yesterday. In Louisville. Under a physician who has no relationship to me, my company, or Kessner Orthopedic. Nathan Miller did not say anything for a long moment, and when he did, his voice was not steady. That's real. That's what she said. No, ma'am, you don't. He stopped. 29 out of 41. Do you know what that number means? Tell me. It means it's not noise. Noise doesn't show up 70% of the time when you ask it to, and stay quiet when you don't. He was talking fast now. Ma'am, that's not a flicker. That's a pathway. There's something down there that's still connected, and it has been sitting under carbon fiber for 15 years, waiting for somebody to call its name. Evelyn Carter turned her chair to face the window. She did it without noticing she'd done it, and she stayed that way. Mr. Miller? Yes, ma'am. I'm not offering you a job. Okay. I'm asking you to help me. Off the books, off the payroll, on your own time for nothing. No title, no salary, no press release. If it works, you can walk away and never speak to me again, and I'll write you the reference of your life. She paused. And if you ever want the job after that, you'll have earned the door so thoroughly that nobody in that building will ever wonder how you got in. Nathan Miller stood in a warehouse break room with a cold burrito. Thursdays are bad for me, he said. Then not Thursdays. Okay. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Okay. At 9:15 the next morning, the 2011 minutes arrived. There were 406 pages, and Evelyn read them the way she read everything, which was fast, and then slowly. And by 2 in the afternoon she had found nothing, and by 4 she had found nothing, and at 6:40 she found it. It was not in the minutes. It was in an appendix, a list of expense authorizations approved by the executive committee during the 11 months she had been out of the building. Line after line of ordinary corporate blood. Legal, insurance, severance, consulting. And on page 381, a single line item. Medical liaison retainer. Prescott A.M.D. approved 02-2011. $180,000 annum 3-year term. Evelyn read it twice. Then she called Vasquez, and Vasquez said, "Read it to me again." And Evelyn read it again, and Vasquez said a word that lawyers do not usually say. Diane. That's your company paying your surgeon? Yes. $180 a year for 3 years? Yes. Evelyn, who signs an executive committee authorization? 2 members. Whose signatures are on it? Evelyn looked at the bottom of the page. There were 2. One was the chief financial officer at the time, a man named Bill Ostrowski, who had died of a heart attack in 2019. The other was Douglas Feeney. At 7:50 that night, Evelyn Carter got Alan Prescott's home number from a hospital administrator who owed her a favor, and she called it, and a woman answered and said he was on the porch, and there was a long shuffling, and then an old man's voice. This is Alan. Doctor, it's Evelyn Carter. The pause was so long she thought the call had dropped. Evelyn. Do you know why I'm calling? I've had about 15 years to guess. That answer went through her like cold water. I was evaluated on Tuesday, she said. Volitional quadriceps activity, right leg, 29 attempts out of 41. Who did the testing? Rachel Okonjo. Prescott exhaled long and slow. She was the best resident I ever had, he said. Then why did you overrule her? Evelyn. You wrote that her finding wasn't reproducible. She reproduced it twice. I know what I wrote. You took $180,000 a year from my company while you were my physician. That's public. That was disclosed. Any hospital counsel in America would tell you that's. You sat on the advisory board of the company that made my brace. Also disclosed. You discontinued my motor testing in 2013, and I was never tested again for 12 years. Evelyn. His voice cracked, and it was not the crack of a man caught. It was worse. It was the crack of a man who had been waiting a long time to explain something and had realized he could not. You want me to be a villain. I want you to be honest. Then I'll be honest, and you're not going to like it because there isn't a villain. There's a room. He breathed. In February of 2011, there was a room with 8 people in it, and I was in that room, and I was the only physician in it, and I sat there and I let a group of businessmen ask me a question that no doctor should ever answer. What question? They asked me what would happen to you if we told you there was a chance, and there wasn't one. Evelyn closed her eyes. And what did you say? I said what I believed. I said the finding was minimal and probably transient. I said the odds were poor. I said that a woman like you would spend the rest of her life chasing it, and that chasing it would destroy her, and that the kindest medicine we could practice was a clean, permanent, well-supported answer. His voice was shaking now. And I have thought about that sentence every week for 15 years, Evelyn. Every single week. You were wrong. Yes. Say it. I was wrong. And you took the money. The retainer came after, 2 weeks after. I told myself it was unrelated, and for about 6 months I believed it. A rough sound, half a laugh. Do you know what the worst part is? Nobody ever told me to do anything. Not once. Nobody said a word. They didn't have to. Who was in the room? Evelyn. Who was in the room, doctor? It doesn't matter who. It is the only thing that matters. Alan Prescott was quiet for a very long time. There were 8 people, he said. 6 of them asked practical questions. 1 of them said almost nothing at all. And the 8th? The 8th one asked me the question. Which question? The one about what it would do to you. Prescott's voice went very small. He asked it 4 times, Evelyn. 4 different ways. He wasn't asking about the company. He kept saying she'll kill herself trying. You don't know her like I do. She'll kill herself trying. Evelyn Carter's hand had gone completely numb around the phone. Say his name. He was your friend. Say his name. Doug, Alan Prescott said. It was Doug Feeney. Evelyn Carter did not hang up. She sat with the phone against her ear and listened to an old man breathing on a porch somewhere in Michigan, and after a while she heard herself say, Doctor. I'm here. Was there a recording? Of the meeting? Of anything? Evelyn, that was February of 2011. There was a conference line. Prescott coughed. I remember because somebody joined late, and there was a tone. Who kept the minutes? I don't know. I'm a physician, I don't... He stopped himself. There was a woman taking notes, young. She wasn't in the room, she was on the line. Do you remember a name? No. Doctor. Evelyn, I want to help you now, and I understand exactly how worthless that is. His voice thinned. I'll sign an affidavit. Whatever your lawyers want. I'm 79. Let them come. That's not why I called. Then why did you call? Evelyn looked at the page on her desk with 2 signatures at the bottom of it. Because for 17 years, she said, I thought the worst thing that ever happened to me was a wet road. At 11:15 the next morning, Diane Vasquez said, Absolutely not. Diane, you do not go to his house. You do not call him. You do not stand in a room alone with a man who is a potential defendant and let him explain himself to you, because I promise you, Evelyn, whatever he says will be beautiful, and it will be the most expensive 40 minutes of your life. He was at my wedding. He signed the authorization. He held my hand in a hospital in Wisconsin for 4 days. He signed the authorization, Vasquez said again flatly. Both of those things are true. That's the whole problem with this business. Evelyn was quiet. You're going anyway, Vasquez said. Yes. Then take Marcus, keep your mouth shut, and let him talk. At 2:40 that afternoon, Doug Feeney opened his front door and looked at her for a long moment and said, "You know." "Yes." "Then come in." He didn't apologize. That was the first thing she noticed. He didn't rush at her with words, and he didn't do the thing men his age did, the sputtering half-defense that started with "Now look." He just moved a chair out of the way so she could get through and stood in his own living room with his hands hanging at his sides like a man waiting for a diagnosis. "Marcus," Evelyn said. "Wait outside." "Ma'am." "Please." Marcus went. "You look tired," Doug said. "Don't." "Okay." February 2011. 8 people. You asked Prescott 4 times. Doug Feeney sat down heavily. 5, he said. It was 5 times. He's off by 1. Evelyn had not expected that, and it took her a second to recover from it. "You're not going to deny it?" "No." "Why?" "Because I've been waiting 15 years for somebody to ask me, and nobody ever did." He rubbed his face with both hands. "You want to know the truth? I thought it'd be a lawyer. I thought one day I'd get a letter. And instead it's you in my living room, and that's about 11,000 times worse." "Tell me why." "Ev, tell me why you sat in a room and asked a doctor to close a door on me." Doug Feeney looked at his own hands. "Do you remember Karen?" he said. Evelyn went still. "Your wife?" "My wife." He nodded slowly. "You remember what she died of?" "Pancreatic. That's what's on the certificate." He looked up and his eyes were red and furious and old. "That's not what she died of. Karen was diagnosed in April of 2004, and they gave her 11 months, and she took 19. And I want you to understand what those 19 months were, Ev, because I don't think you ever asked, and I never told you." He counted on his fingers one at a time, and his hand shook. "Houston, then Boston, then a trial in San Diego. She didn't qualify for that. I got her into anyway. Then a clinic in Tijuana. Then a man in Arizona with a machine." "Doug." "A machine, Eve. I paid $41,000 to a man with a machine, and I sat in that room and I hoped, and I was 52 years old, and I'd run a division of a Fortune 500 company, and I sat in a strip mall in Scottsdale, and I hoped." He was breathing hard. "She spent the last 4 months of her life in a car. Not with her kids, not in her garden. In a car going to the next thing because I could not let her stop. Because every time a doctor said no, I heard maybe." Evelyn didn't say anything. "She asked me to stop," Doug said. "About 6 weeks out. She said, 'Doug, I want to be home.' And I said, 'Honey, there's one more thing.'" He laughed, and it was a terrible sound. "There's always one more thing. That's what nobody tells you. Hope is not a feeling. Ev, hope is a job, and it will work a dying woman to death." "So you decided for me?" "Yes." "You looked at a note that said my leg moved and you decided?" "Yes." "You had no right." "I know. You had no right, Doug. I know that." His voice broke wide open. "You think I don't know that I've known it since about the summer of 2013. I knew it the day I watched you take that company back and put it on your back and run it better with a broken spine than any man in that building ever ran anything. And I sat there in those meetings clapping like an idiot, and every single time I thought, what if? What if she'd been given the number? What if it was 1%? He wiped his face with the back of his wrist. "But by then it was 7 years gone, and there was a retainer with my signature on it. And there was no version of that conversation that didn't end with me losing you. So you kept it." "I kept it. For 15 years. For 15 years." Evelyn sat with her hands in her lap. "Say the part you haven't said," she said. Doug went very still. "What part?" "You've been sitting on the board with me for 15 years, and you never once flinched. Then 3 weeks ago, Richard Hayes called me replaceable in a room, and you turned around and looked out a window." She leaned forward. "You've been afraid of something a lot longer than you've been afraid of me. So say it." Doug Feeney's mouth moved for a second before anything came out. "He's got it," he said. "Got what?" "The February file, the notes, the whole thing." Evelyn's chest went cold. Richard Hayes joined the board in 2015. He joined the board in 2015. He was outside counsel's client contact in 2011. Doug's hands were shaking badly now. He was on the conference line, Ev. He was the one who joined late. At 4:20 that afternoon, in the back of a car crossing the Kennedy, Marcus Bell said, "Ma'am, say something." He was on the line. "Yes, ma'am." He's had it for 15 years, and he waited. For what? Until it was worth more. Evelyn's voice was perfectly level. He didn't need it in 2015. He didn't need it in 2019, when we had a record year. He'd have looked like an arsonist. He needed a year where the board was already nervous. And this is that year. This is that year. She turned toward the window. "Marcus, do you understand what he's holding? It isn't a scandal about a brace. It's a document that says the board of this company made a private medical decision about its own chief executive. If that lands wrong, it doesn't remove Richard Hayes. It removes me. I'm the woman at the center of it. I'm the liability." So he's not blackmailing Feeney to take the company. He's blackmailing Feeney to keep it quiet until March 3rd, and then he's going to use it as the reason everyone should vote for stability. She almost smiled. "It's good. It's genuinely good. I'd have done it." "Ma'am." "I'd have done it, Marcus. That's not a joke." At 8:50 that night, Nathan Miller opened his door to find a woman in a chair on a sheet of plywood for the second time in a month, and this time he didn't look surprised. "Lily's at a sleepover," he said. "So we've got till 9 tomorrow." "Good. You've got that face." "What face?" "The one where somebody's about to get taken apart." He held the door. "Come on in. I made coffee that's terrible." He'd cleared the kitchen table. There were 3 legal pads on it, and a laptop with a cracked corner, and a spiral notebook so old the cover had gone soft. And Evelyn Carter looked at that table and understood that he had been working since the phone call and had never once mentioned it. "How long?" she said. 11 days. "On what?" "On you." He sat down across from her. "Ma'am, before you say anything else, I need to tell you 3 things, and then I need you to decide if you still want me in this." Go. 1. I've built you a protocol. It's not mine. It's Okonjo's. I just built the withdrawal side and the load schedule. It's 18 months. I want to be really clear about that number, not 18 weeks. Fine. 2. It's going to be worse than you think, and I say that knowing you think it's going to be very bad. He tapped the legal pad. "You've been carbon fibered for 15 years. Everything under there is going to have opinions about this." Fine. 3. He hesitated, and then he reached over and slid an envelope across the table. "This came Tuesday." Evelyn opened it. It was 2 pages on heavy paper from a firm in Chicago she knew, and it advised Mr. Nathan Miller that certain intellectual property developed during his employment at Halcyon Biomedical, subsequently acquired, remained the property of the acquiring entity's assigns, and that any consultation, disclosure, or application of said intellectual property in connection with third parties would be considered a material breach, and that they trusted this letter would be sufficient. Evelyn read it twice. "There's no lawsuit here," she said. "I know. There's no cause of action. This is a piece of paper designed to scare a man who can't afford a lawyer." "I know that too." "Then why is your hand shaking?" Nathan looked at his own hand and put it flat on the table. "Because it worked," he said. "Ma'am, I've got $1,100 and a 9-year-old. It doesn't have to be a real lawsuit. It just has to be a lawsuit. I don't get to find out if I'd win. I get to find out if I can make rent in month 4. "Who's the firm?" Bottom of the 2nd page. Evelyn looked. She started laughing, and it wasn't a good laugh. "What?" Nathan said. "It's the same firm that's been billing $400,000 to Richard Hayes's Innovation Committee since February." Nathan sat back. "So he knows about me." "He knows about you." "How?" "Because I sent a black car to a gravel lot in Bedford Park at 5:30 in the morning," Evelyn said, "and I have spent 17 years being watched by people pretending not to watch me, and I got sloppy the first time in my life I got interested in something." She set the letter down. "Mr. Miller, that letter is my fault. I want to say that plainly." "Okay. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want the real answer. Do you want out?" Nathan Miller was quiet for a while. "Can I tell you something stupid?" he said. "Please." 8 years ago, I had a badge and a parking spot and a title, and I was miserable, and I didn't know I was miserable until about year 3 of the van. He turned the coffee cup a half turn. Because the thing I actually liked was never the badge. It was the 20 minutes when you're looking at a problem and everybody else in the room's already decided it's not a problem. He looked up. I got that 20 minutes back in your office 3 weeks ago. First time since 2018. That's not an answer. No, ma'am, I'm not getting out. He tapped the letter. But I'm not being stupid about it either. I want that thing answered by somebody with a name. Diane Vasquez will have a response on their desk by 10 tomorrow. I can't pay her. You're not going to. Ma'am? Mr. Miller, I am the target of that letter. You're just the return address. Evelyn folded it and put it in her bag. Now show me the protocol. At 11:40 that night, Nathan Miller walked a woman through 18 months of her own body on 4 legal pads, and at some point she stopped being a client and started arguing with him about load curves, and at 1 in the morning she said, "That's wrong, that's too aggressive at month 6. And he said, "That's what Okonjo said." And she said, "Then why is it still on the page?" And he said, "Because I was hoping you'd catch it." Evelyn looked at him. "You tested me." "Little bit. Do it again, and I'll fire you from a job you don't have." At 6:10 the next morning, Vasquez called and said, "I need you to sit down." "I'm always sitting down, Diane." "That's a terrible joke, and I'm going to allow it." Paper shuffling. Prescott's affidavit came in overnight. He didn't wait for us to draft it. He wrote it himself longhand and had it notarized at a bank in Traverse City. And he named the room, all 8, including a paralegal on the conference line who took contemporaneous notes. A pause. Evelyn, the paralegal's name is Kathleen Ruiz, and she is currently a partner at a firm in Denver, and she kept her file because she was 26 years old and terrified, and she has kept every file she's ever touched since. Evelyn Carter closed her eyes. She has the notes. She has the notes. She has the call log, and she has a 2-page memo she wrote to her supervising attorney on February 7, 2011, expressing concern that the discussion had, and I'm quoting her, exceeded the scope of governance. Will she give them to us? She already did. She said, and again I'm quoting, "I've been waiting 15 years for this phone call." At 9:50 that morning, Richard Hayes appeared in Evelyn's doorway without an appointment. "Do you have a minute?" "No. I'll take one anyway." He came in and sat. "Evelyn, I want to talk to you as a colleague of 19 years. You've never once talked to me as a colleague of 19 years. That's fair. He crossed his legs. March 3rd is going to be difficult. I'd like it not to be humiliating. For whom? For you. Say the offer, Richard. You've clearly rehearsed it. Executive chair. Board seat for life. Full compensation through 2031 accelerated vesting, and a public statement in your words, not mine, about a planned transition on your own terms. He spread his hands. You keep the legacy. You keep the wing at the Children's Hospital. Nobody ever discusses your health in a proxy filing. And if I don't? Then March 3rd happens, and it gets discussed. Evelyn nodded slowly. Richard, can I ask you something genuinely? Of course. In February of 2011, when you were on that conference line, what did you think was going to happen to me? Richard Hayes did not flinch, and that was the worst part. He simply adjusted the way a man adjusts his weight on a boat. I don't know what you're referring to. Yes, you do. Evelyn, you joined late. There was a tone. She watched him. You've been holding a document about my spine for 15 years, waiting for the market to be right. That's not even a crime, Richard. That's just the coldest thing I've ever heard in my life. Richard Hayes stood up and buttoned his jacket. Take the chair, he said. Please. No. Then I'll see you March 3rd. At 6:15 that evening, Marcus said, Ma'am, can I ask you something? Yes. Why are we waiting? Say more. We've got Prescott's affidavit. We've got Ruiz's file. We've got Halstead Grove and Kestner and the $400,000. Vasquez says we can call an emergency session inside a week and end him. Marcus leaned on the doorframe. So why are you letting him have March 3rd? Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Because if I call the meeting, she said, I'm a woman defending herself. If he calls it, he has to stand up in front of 12 people and make his case first. She looked up. Marcus, I don't want to win. I want it to be finished. I want every person at that table to sit there and watch him say the polite version out loud, and then I want to hand them the transcript of what he said in 2011, and I want them to do the arithmetic themselves. Because if I do it for them, half of them will spend the rest of their lives telling each other it was complicated. That's cold. Yes. I like it. I know you do. At 7:50 that night, she called Nathan. How's the back? Ma'am, it's day 31. That's not an answer. It's day 31 and I've slept 5 hours in 3 days, she said, and I don't want to talk about it. I want to talk about March 3rd. Okay. I want you in the room. Silence on the line. No, Nathan said. Mr. Miller. Ma'am, no. And I wanted to tell you why, and I want you to actually hear it, instead of doing the thing where you go quiet and then get your way anyway. A breath. If I'm in that room, you're the CEO who brought the delivery driver. You know exactly what that looks like. That's not a witness, that's a prop. You hold 6 patents. I held 6 patents, and a firm just sent me a letter about it. His voice was steady. Ma'am, they'd spend 11 minutes on me, and none of them on the affidavit. Don't hand them a shiny object. Evelyn didn't answer for a long moment. That's the 3rd time you've been right in front of me, she said. 4th. Don't push it. At 8:40, on the morning of March 3rd, 12, people took their seats in a room with a walnut table, and one of them said, "Should we get water?" And another one said no. A little too fast. Richard Hayes spoke for 22 minutes. It was, Evelyn had to admit, magnificent. He never used the word wheelchair. He never used the word health. He talked about the succession maturity of the organization, about key person risk, about the responsibility of a board to plan for continuity in an environment of accelerating capital intensity. And he did it with such craft that by minute 15, Evelyn could see 2 of the newer directors nodding without knowing they were nodding. And then he said the sentence, "I want to be clear that this has nothing to do with Evelyn personally and nothing whatsoever to do with her condition." Evelyn Carter let 4 full seconds go by. "Thank you, Richard," she said. "Diane, would you hand those out, please?" Vasquez went around the table. "What is this?" Richard said. "That's an affidavit from Dr. Alan Prescott, dated 11 days ago, notarized in Grand Traverse County, Michigan." Evelyn's voice was almost gentle. "The second document is a contemporaneous memorandum written on February 7, 2011, by a paralegal named Kathleen Ruiz, along with her handwritten notes and the conference call log from February 4th. The room went absolutely still. "Page 4 of the call log," Evelyn said. "There's a line item at 11 minutes and 40 seconds. A participant joined late." Nobody turned to page 4. Everybody turned to page 4. "Richard, would you like to tell them, or should I?" Richard Hayes's face did not change, and later several people at that table would say that was the thing they remembered, that his face simply did not change at all. "This is a 15-year-old document about a medical consultation," he said. "I'd caution the board against—" "It's a document," Evelyn said, "in which 8 people, including 2 members of this board and 1 attorney who is now a partner in Denver, discussed whether to inform me that a physiatrist had recorded voluntary movement in my right leg 14 months after my injury, and then decided not to." She looked around the table. "I found out 3 weeks ago. I'm 58. The note was written when I was 43. Priya Raghavan put her hand over her mouth. "Evelyn," Doug Feeney said. "Not yet, Doug." "Evelyn, let me." "Not yet." She kept her eyes on Richard. "The third document is a Delaware filing showing that a minority holder in Kessner Orthopedic Systems is an entity called Halstead Grove Partners. The fourth is an Illinois nonprofit board disclosure listing the members of Halstead Grove Partners. Richard, would you like to read the third name out loud?" Richard Hayes did not read the third name out loud. "And the fifth document," Evelyn said, is a cease and desist letter sent 9 days ago to a man in Berwyn who makes $41,000 a year by a firm that has billed your innovation committee $406,000 since February. Someone at the end of the table said, "Jesus Christ." "I want to say something," Doug Feeney said and stood up. "Doug." "No, Ev. I've been quiet 15 years. I've earned 4 minutes." His hands were shaking so hard, he had to put them on the table. "My name's on that authorization, page 381. $180,000 a year to Alan Prescott, approved February of 2011. And I signed it, and Bill Ostrowski signed it, and Bill's dead, so I'm the only one left who can tell you what it was." He looked around at faces he'd known for 2 decades. It wasn't a bribe. That's the stupid part. It was a retainer for a medical liaison, because we had a chief executive in a rehab facility, and nobody knew if she was coming back, and the insurers wanted a physician of record. It was ordinary. His voice cracked. And then 3 days later, I sat on a phone call and asked that same physician 5 times whether he'd tell her there was a chance. And the second I did that, the ordinary thing turned into the other thing. Forever. "Doug," Priya said quietly. "Why?" "Because I watched my wife die chasing one more thing," Doug Feeney said. "And I decided I loved Evelyn Carter too much to let her do it. And I want every one of you to hear me say this out loud so it's in the minutes. That was not love. That was me protecting myself from watching it twice." He sat down. "Richard has had that file since 2011, he said. "He came to me in November. He told me he'd bring it forward at the annual if I didn't support the transition." The room made a sound. "That's an accusation without," Richard began. "There's a text message," Doug said. "November 11th, 9:40 at night. I'm 67, and I don't delete anything, Richard. I don't know how." At 10:05, Richard Hayes was asked to leave the room while the board met in executive session. At 10:50, he was informed that the special sessions proposal had been withdrawn, that an independent investigation would be commissioned under the audit committee, and that the board requested his resignation effective immediately. At 11:02, he asked for one thing. He asked whether it could be characterized as a retirement. The vote was 11-0. At 11:40, Doug Feeney resigned from the board of directors of Carter Medical and did not ask for anything at all, and stopped at the door and said, "Ev," and Evelyn said, "Not today." And he nodded and said, "Okay," and left. At 12:15, Evelyn Carter sat alone in a boardroom with a walnut table and 11 empty chairs and felt absolutely nothing. Then she called Nathan Miller. "It's done," she said. "You okay?" "Everyone keeps asking me that." "Yeah, but I don't work for you." Evelyn laughed, and then without any warning at all started crying, and Nathan Miller had the sense to say nothing whatsoever for about 90 seconds. "Sorry." "Nope." "Mr. Miller." "Ma'am, my kid cries at commercials about dogs. We don't do sorry in my house." Evelyn wiped her face. "What now?" she said. Now, she could hear him shift the phone. "Now's the hard part." Month 1 was the mat. Not walking. Not standing. Nothing that looked like anything. 90 minutes a day, 4 days a week, in a converted room on the 12th floor, with Reggie the technician flown up from Louisville, on a rotation. Okonjo had personally designed, and the entire content of Month 1 was Evelyn Carter, lying on her back, attempting to fire a muscle that answered 70% of the time in a laboratory, and about 11% of the time on a Tuesday. Month 2, she got a cold and lost 9 days, and came back, and the number had dropped to 4%. "That's normal," Nathan said. "Don't." "It's normal." "Don't manage me." "I'm not managing you. I'm telling you a fact, and you're allowed to hate the fact." He handed her water. Month 2 is where the curve goes backwards. Okonjo told you that in Louisville. I wrote it on the pad. You said fine. I say fine to everything. Yeah, I've noticed. Month 3. She made a rule that nobody in the building was allowed to ask how it was going. Month 4. Reggie recorded a repeatable hip flexor signal, and everybody in the room got very excited, and Okonjo called it a good day, and Evelyn went back to her office and sat there for an hour. And when Marcus asked her what was wrong, she said, "It's 4 months for a twitch," and Marcus said, "Yes, ma'am," and did not try to fix it. Month 5 was the one Okonjo had warned her about. It came on a Thursday in August at 7:50 in the evening, 98 minutes into a session on the 44th repetition of a movement that had produced nothing at all for 9 consecutive days. "Stop," Evelyn said. "2 more. Stop, I'm done." "Ma'am," I said, "I'm done." She was shaking, and it wasn't from effort. "I'm 59 years old in October. I have given this 5 months. Do you understand what 5 months is at my age? Do you understand what I could have done with 200 hours? Her voice tore. "I run a company, Nathan. 9,000 people. And I have spent every evening since March lying on a mat in a room sweating in front of a 26-year-old with a laptop so that a green line can go up half an inch. That's not recovery. That's just a more expensive way to be told no." Nathan Miller sat down on the mat next to her chair. He didn't argue. That was the thing she remembered afterward. He didn't produce a statistic or a pep talk or the word journey. "You want to know what I did in March of 2021, he said. "No, I'm going to tell you anyway." He looked at the wall. 81st rejection came in at 4 in the afternoon on a Thursday, and Lily was 6, and she came in and asked me why I get sad on Thursdays. And I went in the bathroom, and I sat on the floor, and I did the math on what I was worth, dead versus alive. And it took me about 11 minutes, and I want to be clear that the number came out in favor of alive, but not by as much as it should have. Evelyn didn't move. "Nathan, so here's what I know about month 5. He turned and looked up at her. "Month 5 isn't your body quitting. Month 5 is the day the story you've been telling yourself runs out. Because you didn't start this to fire a quad. You started it because a man in a delivery jacket asked you a question, and for about 3 weeks you got to be a person who might get something back." He shrugged. "And now it's August, and there's no boardroom left to win, and no villain left to beat, and it's just you and a green line. That's all month 5 is. It's the first honest day you've had." Evelyn Carter sat in her chair in a converted room on the 12th floor. "I hate you," she said. "Yes, ma'am." 45. "What?" 45. She put her hands on the arms of the chair. "You said 2 more. That's 45. Reggie got the electrodes back on. At 8:12 on a Thursday night in August, on the 45th repetition of the 209th session, Evelyn Carter sent an order down a road she had been shouting into for 17 years. "Move." And her right knee came up off the mat a full inch and held for a second and a half and dropped. Nobody in the room said anything. Reggie the technician stared at the screen with his mouth open. Nathan Miller had both hands pressed against the top of his head, and Evelyn Carter, who had built an empire, who had buried her father, who had run 9,000 people through a recall and 2 recessions, and never once raised her voice, made a sound that was not a word, and reached out with a shaking hand, and grabbed a fistful of a delivery driver's shirt, and would not let go. Nobody spoke for 11 seconds. Then Reggie the technician said, "I have to say something out loud for the record," in a voice that had gone completely sideways. "And the something is that I've been doing this 4 years, and I've never seen a knee come off a mat in month 5. "Say it again," Evelyn said. "Ma'am." "Say the number again." "Month 5, session 209, repetition 45. Reggie was typing with 2 fingers because his hands weren't working right. Right knee flexion, approximately 1 inch, held 1.4 seconds voluntary, no assist, no stim. Evelyn Carter still had a fistful of Nathan Miller's shirt. "Do it again," Nathan said. "What?" "Do it again, right now, before you think about it." "Nathan, I can't." "Ma'am, I need to know if it's a pathway or a fluke, and so do you. And if we wait until Monday, you will not sleep for 3 nights. He put his hand over hers once, and then took it away. 46. She did it again. Nothing. She did it a 3rd time. Nothing. 4th. Nothing. 5th. Nothing. And she felt the thing she had felt 8,000 times in the dark at Winnetka. The order going out and vanishing into a room that wasn't there, and she heard herself say, "It's gone," in a voice that didn't sound like hers at all. "It's not gone. It's gone. Ma'am, it's 8:19 at night. You've been on that mat 99 minutes, and you just did the single most metabolically expensive thing you've done in 15 years. Nathan was already unhooking the leads. You're not going to get it back tonight. You're not supposed to. We're done. Nathan. We're done. That's not me being nice, that's the protocol. Page 11. At 9:50 that night, Evelyn called Rachel Okonjo in Louisville, and Okonjo picked up on the second ring and said, Reggie already texted me. He used 4 exclamation points which I'll be addressing. Is it real? It's real. It didn't come back. Of course it didn't come back. Okonjo's voice was warm in a way it had never been in that first meeting. Ms. Carter, listen to me. You didn't build a muscle tonight. You proved a road exists. The road's been there since 2011, and it's overgrown, and it has 15 years of carbon fiber parked on top of it. And tonight, a truck got through one time. That's the entire event. It is also the most important thing that has happened in your medical history since the accident. Evelyn sat with her hand over her mouth. Doctor. Yes. When can I stand? Okonjo laughed out loud. That is the first question every single one of them asks, and every single one of them asks it about 4 hours after the first flicker, and I have never once given a number. A pause. I'm not going to give you one either. Give me one. No. Doctor. Because if I say a number, you will chase the number instead of the work, and then you'll miss it, and then you'll quit in month 9 instead of month 5, and month 9, quitting is permanent. Okonjo let that land. Ms. Carter, you're not a woman who needs a finish line. You're a woman who needs a Tuesday. Go do Tuesday. At 6:40 the next morning, a story appeared on a financial news site under the headline, Carter Medical Board, Shakeup Followed Internal Probe into Founder's Care. It was 300 words. It was accurate for 2 of them. By 7:15, Marcus was in her doorway. It's moving. How fast? There are 11 pickups already. The journal's called twice. He glanced at his tablet. There's a version going around that's got your name and the phrase paralysis cover-up in the same sentence. Who leaked? Nobody. That's the thing. Marcus shook his head. The audit committee filed a 8K about Hayes' resignation, and a reporter pulled Ruiz's Denver bar record, and it just assembled. It's a public company, ma'am. There's no such thing as a private board fight. What does communications want? Communications wants you to say nothing for 72 hours. And what do you want? Marcus was quiet a second. I want you to think about the fact that there are about 40,000 people in this country walking around inside a rigid shell right now, he said. And this morning every one of them is reading a story about a billionaire. Evelyn looked up at him. Say that again. Ma'am? Marcus, say it again. There are 40,000 people in a brace this morning, he said, and they don't have a Rachel Okonjo, and they don't have a guy in Berwyn with 4 legal pads, and they don't have a black car. Evelyn Carter turned her chair and looked out the window for a long moment, which she had now done 6 times in 2 weeks after not doing it for 6 years. Get me Diane, she said, and get me Okonjo, and get me Nathan off his route. Ma'am, he won't quit the route. I'm not asking him to quit the route. I'm asking him for a Wednesday. At 11:30 that morning, 5 people sat in a conference room, and Evelyn Carter said, I want to give it away. Diane Vasquez put down her pen. Give what away? The protocol, the withdrawal schedule, the load curves, Okonjo's assessment framework, all of it. Evelyn folded her hands. Open license, no fee. Any clinic, any hospital, any country. Evelyn. Say it, Diane. You don't own it. I know. No, I don't think you do. Halcyon's IP went to the acquirer. The acquirer dissolved into a Delaware entity, and that entity's assets were bought in a portfolio sale in 2019. Vasquez tapped the file. Somebody owns patent 9441208, and it isn't Nathan Miller, and it isn't you. Then who? I've had 2 people on it for 9 days. Vasquez slid a page across. It's Kessner. The room went silent. Nathan Miller, sitting at the far end in a delivery company polo, because he'd come straight off a run, said, Say that again. Kessner Orthopedic Systems acquired a portfolio of 11 dormant patents in a bankruptcy auction in March of 2019 for $406,000. Vasquez didn't look up. Yours was in it. They bought my brace. They bought your brace. The one that takes their brace off people. Yes. Nathan put both hands flat on the table. They didn't buy it to build it, he said. No. They bought it to bury it. Mr. Miller, I'm a lawyer, and I'm going to say the lawyer sentence. Vasquez met his eyes. Companies acquire defensive patents constantly, and it is completely legal, and there is no evidence of intent. She paused. And in 11 years of doing this, I've never seen a dormant portfolio bought by the one company on Earth whose entire revenue model the patent threatens. So make of that what you want. Rachel Okonjo on the speakerphone from Louisville said one word. Wow. Doctor. No, She exhaled. I've spent 15 years thinking I lost that argument because I was 29 and scared. And it turns out the argument was never mine to win. It was already bought. At 2:10 that afternoon, Evelyn Carter said, Then I'll buy it back. They won't sell, Vasquez said. Everybody sells. Evelyn, you are the CEO of their largest competitor, and you are 8 weeks past a governance scandal with their name in the middle of it. They will not sell to you at any price, and if they did, the optics would be, Then I don't buy it. Carter Medical doesn't buy it. Evelyn turned toward the phone. Doctor, does your program have a non-profit arm? A pause. We have a foundation. It's 4 people and a bake sale. How much is in it? About $60,000. How much would you need to run an 18-month restorative protocol for 100 patients who can't pay? Okonjo's voice went careful. Ms. Carter, don't do this on the phone. How much? $11 million a year, minimum. And that's before you find people who can do it. And there are maybe 200 clinicians in North America who can, and I'd have to train the rest. Then train them. Ms. Carter. Doctor, I need you to hear something. Evelyn leaned toward the speaker. In February of 2011, 8 people sat on a phone call and decided what I was allowed to know about my own body. And one 29-year-old wrote it down anyway and got moved out of the building. I have spent 5 months lying on a mat because of 3 sentences you wrote when nobody was going to thank you for it. Her voice didn't waver. I am not offering you money because I'm grateful. I'm offering you money because you were right, and the system punished you for it, and I am in the extremely rare position of being able to make that expensive for the system. The line was quiet a long time. I'll send you a budget, Okonjo said. At 4:40 that afternoon, Nathan Miller found Evelyn in the 12th floor room and said, Can I say something you're not going to like? That appears to be your entire personality. Buying it back doesn't work either. Why not? Because a patent is 20 years from filing. 2014. That thing expires in 2034, and then anybody can build it. He sat down on the mat, which he had started doing without asking sometime around month 3. You're about to spend 4 years and a lot of money on a fight over a piece of paper with 9 years left on it. So we wait 9 years. No, ma'am, so we go around it. Evelyn looked at him. Explain. The patent covers a device, a specific shell with a specific adjustable load transfer mechanism. Nathan pulled a folded paper out of his back pocket, which was where all of his best ideas apparently lived. It does not cover a schedule. It does not cover a clinical protocol. It doesn't cover Okonjo's assessment framework, and it sure as hell doesn't cover me telling a 40-year-old man in Tulsa that somebody should be measuring what his legs can do without the thing he's been wearing since 2019. You're saying we don't need the device. I'm saying the device was never the invention. He looked up at her, and there was something in his face she had not seen in 5 months. Ma'am, that's the part I got wrong in 2014. I was an engineer, so I built a machine, and I spent 2 years trying to get funding for a machine, and the machine's sitting in a vault in Delaware. But the actual idea is one sentence. Which is, somebody has to keep testing. Evelyn Carter sat very still. Say it again. Somebody has to keep testing. That's it. That's the whole thing. If Prescott had ordered one motor exam every 18 months from 2013 to now, You'd have found this in 2019 at the latest, and there wouldn't have been a boardroom, and there wouldn't have been an affidavit, and I'd still be driving a van." He shrugged. "You don't need a patent to test people. You need somebody to decide it's worth the 90 minutes. At 9:15 the next morning, Evelyn Carter did the only interview she gave that year. It ran 11 minutes. She refused to do it on camera in the chair with the city behind her, which the producer had wanted very badly, and instead did it sitting at a table in the 12th floor room with a mat visible over her shoulder and Reggie's laptop still open on a cart. "Ms. Carter, there are reports that your company's board suppressed a medical finding about your recovery. That's not accurate. It's not. 2 members of my board participated in a conversation in 2011 in which a physician was asked whether it would be kind to withhold a finding from me. The physician made a judgment. I don't think anybody in that room believed they were doing something evil. I think they believed they were protecting me." Evelyn folded her hands. "That's what I want people to understand. Nobody twirled a mustache. 8 reasonable people in a reasonable room did an unreasonable thing, and it cost me 15 years. You've said you don't want an apology from them. I've had an apology. I've had 3. She almost smiled. "Apologies are cheap, and they're also not nothing. I'm not interested in punishment. I'm interested in the 90 minutes. Sorry. Every 18 months, a person with an incomplete spinal cord injury should get a formal motor exam. It takes 90 minutes. It costs a few $100s. Mine was discontinued in October of 2013, with a one-line note that said further testing was not clinically indicated." She looked directly at the camera for the first time. "If you are watching this, and you've been in a chair for more than 5 years, and nobody has tested you since the first 2, that is the entire message of this interview. Ask for the test. Ask this week. And if the answer is no, then ask a different doctor," Evelyn Carter said. "I waited 17 years to ask twice." By that evening, the clip had 4 million views. By the following Tuesday, Okonjo's clinic had received 9,100 emails and had to shut down the contact form, and Rachel Okonjo called Evelyn at 11 at night and said, "What did you do to me?" and then started laughing and couldn't stop, and then said, 9,000 people, Evelyn. 9,000 people who nobody has measured. Month 6 was worse than month 5. That was the part nobody would have believed if she'd said it out loud. The knee came up twice in month 6. Twice in 23 sessions, and on the 14th session, she vomited into a trash can from pain, and Reggie put a towel on her neck and said absolutely nothing about it afterward ever, which was the single most professional thing anyone had ever done for her. Month 7, the knee came up 9 times. Month 8, 26. Month 9, Okonjo flew up and watched a session and said, "Okay, we're changing the protocol." And Nathan said, "To what?" And Okonjo said, "To the one where she's upright." And Evelyn Carter said, "Say that again." And Okonjo said, "You heard me." At 7:50 on a Monday in December in month 10, they put a woman who had not borne weight in 18 years into a support frame, and she lasted 4 seconds, and it was not standing by any definition anyone in the room would defend, and she got dumped back into the chair shaking so hard she couldn't hold water. 4 seconds, she said. 4 seconds, Nathan said. That's nothing. Ma'am, in March you couldn't fire a quad. That's nothing, Nathan. Okay. He crouched down in front of her, which he had never once done in 10 months, and which she noticed. Then tell me the number that's something. Go ahead. Say it out loud, and I'll write it on the pad, and I swear to God we'll chase it. What's the number? Evelyn opened her mouth and found that she didn't have one. That's what I thought, Nathan said and stood up. 4 seconds. Wednesday we go for 5. At 6:40 on a Saturday morning in January. Evelyn Carter's phone rang, and it was a hospital in Skokie, and a nurse said, "Are you the emergency contact for a Nathan Miller?" Evelyn's whole body went cold. What happened? Ma'am, he's fine, he's here, he's talking. He was in a vehicle collision on Cicero around 5:15 this morning. He's got a fractured left wrist and some bruising from the belt. Is his daughter? He was alone in the vehicle, ma'am. She got there at 7:20, and Nathan Miller was sitting on the edge of a bed in a paper gown with his arm in a temporary splint, arguing with a resident. I need to be out of here by 8. Mr. Miller. My kid's with a neighbor, and the neighbor has to be at work at 8:30. Nathan, Evelyn said. He looked up and had the decency to look caught. Ma'am. They called me. Yeah, well. He shifted. I put you down in November. Figured you had a lot of phones. What happened? Serpentine belt. He laughed and then stopped because laughing hurt. 3 years I've been listening to that thing. It went on the ramp and I lost the steering assist and I put it into a barrier at maybe 20. Insurance is going to total it. It's a $2,000 car. How are you getting to work? I'm figuring that out. Nathan. Ma'am, I'm figuring it out. Evelyn Carter sat in the hospital hallway in Skokie at 7 in the morning and made a decision she had been avoiding for 10 months. No, she said. You're not. Excuse me. You're not figuring it out. You're 44 years old. You hold 6 patents. 4 of them are in clinical use in 11 states. You have spent 10 months rebuilding my nervous system for free on your own time after driving a route, and this morning you crashed a $2,000 car into a barrier because you couldn't afford a belt. She leaned forward. And I have let you do that. For 10 months. Because you told me once that you needed to earn the door, and I respected it, and I was wrong to respect it that long. Nathan didn't say anything. So here's what's going to happen, she said. I'm not offering you a job. Ma'am, I'm telling you that the Okonjo Restorative Institute has an opening for a director of engineering, that the position is funded by a foundation. I don't sit on the board of that. Rachel Okonjo will interview you and will hire you or not hire you entirely on her own judgment, and that if she hires you, you will report to her and not to me. Evelyn sat back. I have no vote. I have no veto. If she says no, I never mention it again. Nathan Miller stared at her. That's not charity, he said slowly. No, it isn't. That's... He stopped. Ma'am, that's a real job. It's a real job with a real boss who will be harder on you than I ever was. She'll say no. She might. She's got standards. She has extremely good standards, Evelyn said. That's why I picked her. At 2:15 that afternoon, Rachel Okonjo called Nathan Miller and interviewed him for 1 hour and 40 minutes, and she asked him 91 questions, and at the end of it she said, Mr. Miller, I'm going to ask you the last one, and I want you to think before you answer. Okay. Why should the person who designed the withdrawal protocol be the same person who runs it? Wouldn't you defend your own design past the point where you should? Nathan was quiet a long time. Yeah, he said. Probably. That's your answer. Doctor, if I told you no, I'd be exactly the guy you're worried about. He shifted the phone. So build a review that isn't me. Put Reggie on it. Put a physical therapist with 15 years on it who thinks I'm an idiot. I'll design the mechanism and somebody else gets the veto, and I'll live with it because I already watched what happens when one guy in a room gets to be the only one who knows something. Okonjo hired him on the spot. He gave 4 weeks' notice at the warehouse. The dispatcher took him out for a beer and said, You know what I always figured about you? What? That you were going to get out and never call. I'm going to call Ray. No, you're not. The dispatcher clinked his glass against Nathan's. And that's fine. That's how it's supposed to work. At 5:50 on the last day of his route, Nathan Miller drove a van to a 2-bedroom rental in Berwyn and told his daughter he had a new job, and Lily said, Do you still get home at 4? And Nathan Miller, who had been braced for 100 questions, was not braced for that one. Most days, he said. Some days it'll be 6. Lily thought about it. Is it the kind of job where you're not sad on Thursdays? Nathan sat down on the arm of the couch. Yeah, kid. Then it's fine, Lily said, and went to get the tablet and did not do her homework first, and he let it go. Month 14. She stood for 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Month 16. She took a step in a frame with 2 people spotting her, and it was not a step. It was a controlled fall with hope in it, and she called it a step for the rest of her life. Month 18 on the last day of the protocol. Rachel Okonjo had drawn on 4 legal pads in a kitchen in Berwyn. Evelyn Carter stood up from her chair in a converted room on the 12th floor of her own building with a walker and a gait belt and one hand under each elbow and moved 11 feet. 11 feet took her 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Nobody clapped. She'd made a rule about that in month 7. Reggie recorded it. Okonjo watched it on a video link from Louisville, with her hand over her mouth. Nathan Miller stood at the far end of the 11 feet and did not say one word the entire time, because he'd learned in month 9 that she couldn't do it if anybody talked. When it was over, she sat down hard and put her head back and breathed for about 30 seconds. Then she said, "Where's the phone?" "Ma'am." "Where's my phone, Marcus?" "Who are you calling?" "Doug Feeney." Marcus handed it over without a word. It rang 4 times. "Ev." His voice was older than it had been 18 months ago. Much older. "Doug? I've been reading about you. I bet you have. I want you to know I never said one word to anybody. Not one reporter, not one, 'I know, Doug, I know.'" She closed her eyes. "I need to tell you something, and then I need to hang up because if I stay on this call, I'll say something I mean and something I don't, and I won't be able to tell you which is which." "Okay." "I walked 11 feet about 90 seconds ago." The sound Doug Feeney made was not a word. "Doug." 11 feet, he said, and his voice came apart completely. "Ev. 11 feet. I'm not calling because I forgive you. No, God no, I know. I might. Someday. I'm not there." Evelyn's own voice was shaking now, and she let it. "But you sat in a room in 2011 because you loved somebody and you couldn't stand to watch it twice, and you were wrong, and it cost me half my life. And I decided this morning that I'd rather you know about the 11 feet than not know. That's all this is. That's the whole call." "Ev." "That's the whole call, Doug." "Thank you," Doug Feeney said. "Thank you for telling me." She hung up and sat there. "Was that a good idea?" Marcus said. "No idea," Evelyn said. "Ask me in 10 years. The independent investigation ran 14 months and produced 206 pages, and it found no evidence of a criminal conspiracy, which surprised nobody. And it found what it called serious lapses in governance and a failure of the board to distinguish between concern for an executive and control of an executive, which surprised nobody either. And it recommended 11 structural changes, all of which were adopted. And the 9th one was the only one anybody outside the company ever remembered. It said that no member of any board of Carter Medical could ever again participate in any discussion regarding the medical care of any employee. Richard Hayes was never charged with anything. He sat on 2 boards afterward, both smaller, and he gave an interview in 2029 in which he said that the events of that period had been mischaracterized and that he had acted throughout in what he believed to be the interests of shareholders. And Evelyn Carter read it on a plane and put the magazine in the seat pocket and did not think about it again. Kessner Orthopedic Systems was acquired in 2031, and the acquiring company dissolved its dormant patent portfolio in a public release, and on a Tuesday in June, Patent 9441208 became free, and Nathan Miller found out about it from a Google alert while he was making his daughter's lunch. He called Evelyn. "It's free." "I heard." "You heard. How did you—" "Mr. Miller, I've had a person watching that filing for 6 years. You never told me. You'd have checked it every day." Nathan laughed. "Yeah, I would have. So build it." "I'm going to." The Okonjo Restorative Institute served 4,100 patients in its first 6 years. Of those, according to the paper, Rachel Okonjo published in year 7, with a co-author named N. Miller, listed, second 9% regained some measure of voluntary motor function, below the level of injury, more than 5 years after their injury date, which is a number that meant almost nothing to a general audience, and meant a great deal to about 400 families. The paper's most cited line was not a finding. It was in the discussion section, and it said that in the study population, the single strongest predictor of a missed recovery window was not the severity of the injury, and was not the age of the patient, but was simply the number of years since the patient's last formal motor examination. The number in the population they studied averaged 9.4 years. Evelyn Carter never walked without support. She wanted people to know that later, when the story got repeated and started growing the way stories do. She used a walker for short distances and a chair for everything else. And on bad days, she used the chair entirely, and there were a lot of bad days. She did not throw the chair away. She had one built with her own company's name on it in year 4, because she'd spent 19 years selling equipment to people whose lives she had not actually understood until she needed it herself. And she never once described any of it as being freed from anything. But she moved her desk in year 2. She had it turned 90 degrees, so the glass was in front of her instead of behind her left shoulder, and she stopped scheduling anything before 8:30 in the morning, and every weekday between 8 and 8:30, she sat facing the window and watched 20,000 people walk up Wacker Drive. Kids running for the bus, men carrying 2 coffees and a laptop bag, a woman crouching to tie a little girl's shoe and standing back up like standing back up was nothing. She had spent 6 years unable to look at it. Now she could not stop. At the retirement dinner in year 8, 900 people stood up when she came in, and she made them sit down, and she gave a speech that ran 4 minutes because she had never in her life given a long one. "Somebody's going to tell you tonight that I never gave up," she said. "That's not true. I gave up for 17 years. I gave up thoroughly and professionally, and I built an entire life on top of giving up, and I built it so well that people used me as an example of courage." The room was completely quiet. What happened to me wasn't courage. What happened to me was a man in a delivery jacket who was too tired and too broke to be polite, and who looked at my equipment for 4 seconds and asked the only question in 17 years that nobody had asked. She looked out at 900 faces. He didn't promise me anything. He didn't tell me I could walk. He didn't tell me to believe in myself. He asked me what I could do when every other person in my life had spent 15 years measuring what I couldn't. She found Nathan Miller at a table near the back. "I want to tell you what I've learned," she said, since I'm apparently allowed 1 sentence of wisdom before they take the microphone away. Laughter. "The people who fail you will almost never be villains. Mine weren't. Mine were a surgeon who thought he was being kind, a friend who'd buried his wife, and a room full of reasonable people trying to protect a woman they cared about from a hope they thought would kill her." Her voice went hard. "Kindness that decides things for you is not kindness. It's ownership. And it will take years off your life while everybody involved sleeps perfectly well." She let that sit. So here's my sentence. If you are sitting in this room tonight, and there is something about your own life that everybody around you has already decided is finished, and nobody has actually checked in a very long time, go check. Not because it'll work. It probably won't. Check anyway. Because the answer belongs to you, and it has always belonged to you, and no one on this earth has the right to close a door on your behalf and call it mercy. Nathan Miller drove himself home that night in a car that was 11 years newer than the one he'd put into a barrier on Cicero. Lily was 19 and away at school, and had texted him a photo of the invitation with 4 exclamation points, which is a family trait that skipped no one. He got home and sat in the driveway for a minute the way he'd been doing since 2018, and then he went inside and got the spiral notebook off the shelf, the one with 11 years of notes in it, and then 8 more after that, and he turned to the page from a Thursday night in a kitchen in Berwyn. 2 lines in ballpoint written at 1 in the morning by a man with $11 in his checking account. The first line was a citation for a Louisville study. The second line said ask whether anyone has ever tested her without it. He closed the notebook. 17 years, 11 specialists, $3.1 million, and a room full of reasonable people had all arrived at the same answer. And every one of them had been certain, and every one of them had been wrong. And one man who had lost everything except the habit of asking had turned out to be right. That is the entire story. And it is true, in the only way that matters. Somebody has to keep asking, and somebody has to keep testing. And the day the asking stops is the day the door closes, no matter who is standing on the other side of it telling you it was for your own good.